And we could do a clap in 3, 2, 1. Sweet.
First one was better.
Yeah, it was. It was a much nicer clap, I think.
It was in sync. Our powers combined.
One day, we'll be aligned again. Okay. This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two fantastic human beings, Brian Murray.
Hello.
And Rene Rodriguez.
Bueno.
Thank you guys for being on the show this week. I'm super excited to talk to you about comics because it is quite honestly my favorite thing in the world to do, but only with a handful of select individuals, as I've talked about many, many times on the show. But let's not get into that. Instead, let me ask the question I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Brian.
I've been good. Just doing my thing. Had a lot of the joys of home ownership cropping up. Had to get a new washing machine. Got a guy coming to patch our foundation next week.
Oh, so, double fun.
Yeah, it's definitely don't miss renting an apartment at all. Fortunately, comics have been good. I haven't actually read any of my new issues in a long time. I actually just went and picked them up for the first time in like a month today, because I'm my comic shop's favorite customer. Mm-hmm. But what I did read was Saga. All of it. The whole thing.
All 9 volumes?
All 9 volumes in a single day.
Holy smokes.
That sounds like a weird... for some reason, I just thought of Superman. Reads all of Saga in a single day.
Yeah.
But it's Brian, not Superman.
I also read all of Saga in a very short amount of time, but not in a single day. Holy smokes.
Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend it necessarily, but the story does really lend itself to that. I feel like maybe it's just because I read it in such a short amount of time, but I feel like it really flows well together. You know, there's after every single issue or every single volume, I really wanted to get right into the next one. I didn't want to stop and, eat dinner or anything pedestrian like that.
Right.
Fortunately, Kate was here to make sure I behaved remotely like a human being while undergoing this process. Fiona Staples, gorgeous artwork, obviously. Everybody knows that, but can't be said enough times. I really like the character designs between like the people with wings and the people with horns and then the people who are TVs. I like Goose.
Goose, everyone loves Goose.
Finally know who Goose is.
Goose is a good meal.
Renee, shut your mouth.
How dare you? How dare you talk about my son like that?
I thought Leonard was your son.
No, Leonard is my old son.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Brian has a new son, and he's a comic book character.
Yeah, I dug into that because of a very special Patreon exclusive we have coming up. Mike, you want to go into that?
Oh, yeah. So I got this crazy idea in my head to read all of Saga and then have a big fat discussion about it. But we're not just going to do we all read all of Saga and then we're going to do one big episode about it. Instead, we're going to do a series that covers every single individual episode or issue of Saga. And we're going to break it down real hard in little tiny chunks. So pretty soon we're going to start recording this series. It's going to be me, Brian Murray, Kara Shimborski, and Kate Lamphere. And we are all going to talk about Saga. And it's going to be a really, really fun series. I don't want to give any more details other than that. I did describe this to one of our listeners. Actually, he and I had lunch. And so if you're in New York and you want to have lunch with me, let me know. But because that's a thing that I do, I guess. But I explained it to him, and he seemed pretty on board. He seemed really excited. So hopefully, we're gonna get this recorded this summer, and it's gonna start coming out. I don't think Saga has been announced to come back. So if you're looking to catch up and you want to hear some people talk about a series that's really, really amazing, and you've already read it, hopefully you'll really enjoy it, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna have a lot of little episodes to just kind of fill in some time throughout your day, and it's gonna be really cool. I'm very jazzed about it. It's gonna be on Patreon, and then eventually it'll be out into the public after some time. But we're gonna start it on Patreon. It's gonna be cool.
And this probably goes without saying, but it's going to be all spoilers, heavy spoilers.
Yeah,
I'm saying it now because I know we'll forget to say it at the beginning of every episode. So consider this your spoiler warning.
Yeah, I'm real excited for that. But anyways, let's continue talking about comics that we've read. Renee, what have you been reading? How have you been?
I've been good. In the time that I was last on this episode, I guess... Oh, yeah. No, I just had a birthday, so now another year older, another year closer to being buried with my comics.
Birthday!
Thanks.
What are you now, 16, 17?
It's 19. Thank you.
It's definitely not 19,
It's definitely
guys.
not, no, I'm 29 now. Yeah, it's a thing. But no, I'm older. I've read a lot of comics. Comics have been great to me. Comics and manga are the only sweet, I can't even think of words right now. They've been my savior.
I don't like the road you were taking us down there.
Yeah, it was great. I was like, what? I don't know where I'm going with this. But you know what? They were the only thing that were really enjoyable the last couple months, just because of my work schedule. I've just been working a lot and a lot of heavy hours. But, it was nice to know that I had comics waiting at home. I also bought a lot of manga. Like, a lot. Like, if you guys remember how much I bought at C2E2, like, times that by, like, 4.
Oh, brother.
I need a new bookcase.
I was going to say, it sounds like you definitely... Yeah.
It's a lot. They're just overflowing. It's a mess. But also, it's been delightful. And then the funny thing is, the stuff that I read for this episode to talk about was none of that stuff. It was all stuff that I purchased like today on Comixology. I finally read Fence.
Cool. Yes!
So
got him.
I read it for Mike, also to just rub it in his face that like I read your recommendation.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you're right. It is like a manga, which I appreciate. But it also kind of reminded me a little bit of the Avatar: The Last Airbender comics, a little bit.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, but like I got to the end of Volume 2, and I was just like, well, now I'm upset that there is no more fencing.
Yeah. So well, supposedly there's going to be more, but they're going to release it in OGN form versus single issues, which I'm pretty okay with if it comes out on like a semi-regular cadence, like once every 8 months or something like that. I don't know what their schedule's going to be like, but there is more coming.
I mean, I guess I'll read it. I already own the first 2 volumes now, so what's another couple? Am I right, bookshelf? It says under the weight of all the things I've put on it.
Rene's bookshelf groaning in the background.
You probably could. It doesn't look good. It's like weighted down. I also read the Amazing Nightcrawler from the Age of X-Men. X-Man, my bad.
X-Man.
X-Man. Yeah. I only read the first issue, though, because I had to come do this. And Mike was like, yo, ETA. And I was like, oh, I got caught up in fictional Kurt Wagner. Not that there's a real Kurt Wagner. I'm sure there's a real Kurt Wagner. Aside from that. It's interesting. I don't know how to feel about it, but I'm going to keep reading it, I guess. Yeah, that's what I read this week. What about you, Mike? What'd you do? How are you? How's your beard?
I've been pretty good. I've been playing a lot of D&D, as I said before we started recording. Like I had D&D 3 days this week, and they were all very long sessions. I'm not mad about that, but it's just that takes up a lot of time, and I've just been doing a lot of talking because of that. As I said, I went and got lunch with one of our fantastic listeners who happens to be working in New York City this summer, so that was really cool. We sat and chatted about comic books because that dude's super cool. Shout out to VG, you're amazing. Otherwise, I've been kind of just picking and choosing random comics to read on top of some stuff that I've been reading for minisodes and all this stuff. I realized that I put a lot of things on my plate for the months of June and July, not realizing that like it basically means that I don't have any free time to read other things. Like I had to read a bunch of X-23. Nick and I sat down and we read Ice Cream Man Volume 2, Strange Neapolitan. We recorded a minisode about that yesterday. I will say Volume 1 was weird. Volume 2 is even fucking weirder, and I love it. I cannot get enough of this series. I am like salivating, waiting to read Volume 3. I have it ready. Nick and I are going to record another mini-sode about that. Like, we're really, really on board for it. There's an issue in Volume 2, I will say, that I think is Eisner nomination worthy because of the way that the story is told and just the clever page design that they do. I was really, really impressed with that volume on the whole. It really builds into the strange narrative. But there's a mini-sode coming for that. this July. We'll have a little bit more information about that after the break in this episode. But the other thing I want to talk about that I read was Simon Hanselman's Megahex. This is also known as like the Meg and Mog series that you may have seen from Fantagraphics. This is a series about a witch and her boyfriend / friend cat, who is like an actual cat. But they exist in this world where they're kind of like stoner losers that live in this dumpy house with their friend Owl, and they treat their friend Owl like a piece of shit. But he's the only person that has a real job. Meg and Mog, the witch and the cat, they are just kind of bums. All they do is smoke pot and take acid and party, and they have these wacky friends, and everyone's like, some people are like humanoid animals, like anthropomorphic animals, but Mog is actually just like a cat that walks around on all fours. It's a really bizarre book where no one is likable, and the humor is really crude, but for some reason I loved it. I couldn't stop reading it. So I've borrowed the second volume.
The Friends phenomenon.
Yeah, it's the Friends phenomenon. It was really interesting. I didn't think I was going to like it going into it, because Tia had recommended it for the Goodreads reading challenge for this year, and just looking at it, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, but holy shit, I was really impressed. Like, if you're not into like stoner, dumb humor, like, you're probably not going to dig it, but I don't know, for some reason it was like the right thing for me to read one day, and I demolished the first volume, and the next couple of volumes, I think, or maybe one or two more, are on Comixology Unlimited, so I borrowed those, and they're queued up on my iPad to read. So I really enjoyed it. I was very surprised. I found myself laughing out loud at all just the dumb, bad stuff. And it's weird because it's kind of like a true escapism, in that, like, it's not like super heroics where you get to imagine yourself as a better person. Instead, it's like you get to imagine yourself as like a bum who's like doing dumb stuff and wasting all of their time and not really caring about anything or anyone. And for some reason, I needed that. I don't know why. It was a really, really fun book. Overall, though, I think it's definitely not for everybody. I can't give it like my highest recommendation, but I certainly had a good time reading it. Like, just from a purely, I need some stupid humor in my life kind of perspective. So that was me. Have you guys read this at all? Have you guys read this for like the reading challenge yet?
This is actually the first I'm hearing about it. So
okay.
It sounds wild.
It most certainly is. But if you've got a Comixology Unlimited subscription, you can get it. You can borrow it. It's on there. So I got my $6.99's worth, or whatever the price is, by just borrowing this, because normally I think it's like a $20 trade. So it's pretty nice.
What's one more subscription service?
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so let's talk about comics that are coming out this upcoming week. Comic books are dropping on June 26, 2019. What are you both excited for this week? Let's start with you, Renee.
Well, I am excited for a manga. Shocker. I'm excited for the new chapter of Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba, which is a newer series. It's chapter 163 is coming out this week. So,
that's considered a newer series?
I mean,
with 163 chapters?
It's under 200, okay? Like, I blew through it in like less than a week, okay? Catch up.
Okay.
It's only a couple volumes. Like I think I saw like the first 4 volumes at Barnes & Noble. I was like, if you're under 5 volumes, it's pretty new, okay?
Sure.
Get off me. I don't know. You know, it's not like One Piece that has got like 800 some, you know. And it's not like it's not like telling someone, "Hey, read Bleach," and they're seeing volumes in the 50s. You know, it's less intimidating. I don't know. Under 200 has always seemed really light to me. I don't know why, which is ridiculous because all of Sailor, like the first run of Sailor Moon, was like 60 chapters.
Yeah,
but I digress. Point is, Demon Slayer. There's some pretty nuts stuff going on, and the last fight that will be, I think is going to be concluded in this chapter. I'm very excited for that because Inosuke, who is one of the Demon Slayers, is the man, or Boar, as he prefers to be referred to. It's a whole thing. And Kanao is, I think that's how you say her name, but she's also dope. Like, this last fight was awesome, which was even better than the fight before that. If you really want, like, beautiful art and, like, just... Because they've done a whole different style of fighting, and the art done for every single fight is beautiful. It's like a portrait. It is absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend. And you can read it read all the chapters on Shonen Jump, which you can do through Comixology or through Viz. And again, that's like $25 a year, which is pretty cheap.
That's a steal. I mean, the Shonen Jump, I think we've said it a million times. The Shonen Jump subscription is an absolute steal. 100 chapters a day. I can't even imagine how someone would do that. But if you read 100 chapters a day for a month, like, you're going to get through only a third of their fucking library. It's insane.
And they keep adding stuff. They just added like 3 more titles like last week.
Yeah, it's wild.
And,
I fucking love it, man.
Yeah, and they also have Dragon Ball Super on there as well, because the manga is going, as I think it's continuing, or it's going far. It's farther than the anime went, and even though it's a separate canon, Akira Toriyama has a lot of influence on the manga. He's the original creator of Dragon Ball. So,
yeah, it's exciting. What about you, Brian? What are you excited for this week?
This week, I'm looking forward to Life is Strange number 6. I feel like I've gone on and on about this series before, so I probably don't have to dig into it too much. That's Emma Viacelli writing, Claudia Lenardi on the line work, and Andrea Izzo on colors. And maybe it's just from looking at the cover of issue number 6, but I really like Andrea Izzo's colors. There's something about them it's very matte, like there's absolutely nothing shiny or reflective or anything like that about it, and for some reason it just really works for me. Gun to my head, I couldn't explain to you why I like it so much, but I don't know, it just works. I actually thought this series was done at issue 4, and then when I was at the comic shop this morning, had issue number 5 waiting in my pull list. And then when I was looking for what was coming out next week, I saw that issue number 6 comes out next week. So,
I mean, happy surprises, I guess, right?
Yeah, right? Normally it's finding out that a book you liked got canceled, not that it's actually still going.
Oh.
Right. Oh. I can hear Nick, his ears are burning. He's saying, if only you'd have read the previews, Brian. But I understand. You have time. Or you don't have time to spend your life digging through 1,000 pages every month. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I have the time. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm busy. I'd rather die is all.
I gotcha.
What about you, Mike? What are you looking forward to?
Oh, I am looking forward to the most obvious pick of the month or of the week, and this is Mr. and Mrs. X number 12. This is Kelly Thompson and Javier Pena. This is the Rogue and Gambit get married, and then they have a bunch of wild romps across the universe and across dimensions, because why wouldn't that happen to Rogue and Gambit? This has been a super duper fun series. Kelly Thompson has been killing it on writing. Javier Pena and Oscar Baldua, I believe it's Balzaldua, I think, have been doing a lot of really good, like, amazing art. I don't know, I've really fucking loved this series. And issue number 12 is the last issue in the series. They're calling it Rogue and Gambit's Last Stand. What happened in issue number 11, spoilers for last month's issue of Mr. and Mrs. X. Skip ahead a couple minutes and you won't hear the spoilers, but Rogue and Gambit get kidnapped, or I should say Gambit gets kidnapped by the League of Assassins. I guess, let me take that back. Gambit goes down to New Orleans to investigate some stuff that's been happening with the Thieves Guild that he's been the king of since 2013, but he really hasn't been a good king or leader or whatever they call it. And so it turns out that the Assassins Guild, who have been arch rivals of the Thieves Guild in New Orleans, they've merged together and they're trying to usurp Gambit's power. So he goes down there to kind of like settle scores, and of course he kicks everyone's ass. He's the king of thieves. He's the bestest thief that's out there. But he didn't expect the Assassin's Guild to be there, and so when his ex-wife shows up, he gets all kerfuffled and then ends up being completely covered in chains, hung up on a wall, and it's the most hilarious thing in the world. And there's a great moment where Rogue shows up, and Gambit says, well, of course she'd come save me. She's my wife. She knows where I am. She's amazing. And there's this moment where Rogue steps into the room, and she should be fighting like the chief villain, but instead she goes to help Gambit, and he's like, wait, stop, you have to. She's like, no, fuck all that bullshit. You're my husband. I need to take care of you. And I was like, oh my God, this is everything I've ever wanted in a comic. And Kelly Thompson has just been nailing their relationship. She did such a fantastic job in Rogue and Gambit, the little miniseries that kind of led up to this series, and I've just been loving it. I cannot express how much fun I've been having. I'm a diehard Rogue and Gambit shipper. I'm a diehard Gambit fan. I love Rogue to death. Like, to put this book together seemed impossible, and to actually have it survive seemed even more impossible, and yet Kelly Thompson was able to basically drive us to the finish line of 12 issues. On the outside of this book, I will say from a meta perspective, I really appreciate Marvel's willingness to do these little 12-issue maxi series, because nothing peeves me more than seeing what is supposed to be an ongoing get canceled at 12 issues versus I have a 12-issue plan and I'm just going to tell something, because I don't think Rogue and Gambit could really drive a 50-issue series, but they definitely can drive a 12-issue series and tell a very good story that develops their characters, and that's exactly what this book was. So I'm happy to see it come to an end. As much as I want more, I'm willing to take a break and then have a pickup come later where we get another Rogue and Gambit series, another Mr. and Mrs. X series. The only thing I don't want to happen is that I don't want this whole run to end with them breaking up, because I would basically fucking boycott Marvel at that point, because that's unnecessary. They've built up this whole run about how, despite all of the trials and tribulations, Rogue and Gambit have found themselves back together, and if they break up at the end of this volume, then what the fuck was the point of the whole series? Because the series is supposed to be about, despite the hardships, their marriage can survive, and if that can't happen after the end of this volume, I will be very mad.
Just got to look forward to a few years from now when they have Old Man Gambit coming out, and it's just him and Old Lady Rogue. Just
yeah, I'm 100% on board for that too. Like, still in their 60s,
the crabby
kicking ass.
Old married couple.
exactly. But yeah, that's me. I'm very excited for that. But let's take a break. When we come back, we're gonna talk about why we hate new comic books. No, that's not true. But we do have a topic, and we'll be back in just a second. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to remind everyone that I Read Comic Books will be taking our yearly 4-week break for the month of July. For the 4 weeks in July, you will still be getting regular episodes from us, but they will be minisodes, such as the X-23 episode I talked about and the Ice Cream Man episodes I was talking about. We'll be delivering some really cool stuff, but they'll be shorter, a little bit more focused topics for the 4 weeks of July, and then we'll be back in August. So don't you worry, we will be back, but we're taking 4 weeks off. But let's get into this week's topic. I was a little bit joking when I said that we were going to be talking about why we hate new comic books, but in fact, the question is, and this was posed by Rene, why do we hate new? Let's have a discussion about the continued shutdown of new ideas or new heroes taking on old mantles, character deaths, so on and so forth. So, Rene, I know you've got a lot of thoughts about this. Could you just lead us into the beginning of this discussion, and then we'll kind of do some back and forth from there?
Yeah. I guess this whole thought came from way back when, after I guess with DC's launch of the New 52, because if you guys remember, during comics at that point, Bruce Wayne had been killed during Final Crisis, and Dick Grayson had taken up the mantle as Batman, and we had a bunch of new titles and new stories happening, and Batman was different and everything was changing, and I believe around that time, Bucky was also Captain America, and then all of a sudden, I think it was around the same time, both Captain America, or both Steve Rogers and Bruce Wayne, came back to life to take back their mantles. Also, both of them...
time.
Yeah, both of them dealt with time. But that's we're not here to talk about that. But I just thought it was very interesting that I was like, oh, well, we had all these kinds of new things that we had never seen before and new experiences, and I was like, well, why does that happen? And from that point, we've always had, new characters taking over mantles, like the Blue Beetle and the Question, and I can't
30 fucking Green Lanterns.
Yeah. And there's all these characters that take over mantle, like Ant-Man has been like there's been 4 different Ant-Men, and at some point though, we always jump back to the first, and I just started to wonder, like, why do we get rid of these new ideas? I just don't know why. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. Other than that seems like we hate new things.
Gotcha. I mean, when we were talking about this, and I was thinking about like what to discuss for this episode. I mean, I think there's a lot of polarizing stuff that's been happening in comics for the last like 5 or 6 years that are kind of related to this. I think with the death of Batman, I think a lot of people were surprised, but I don't remember there being like a truly negative reaction to, you know, the new Batman. With Dick Grayson taking over the mantle and having Damian Wayne running as Robin again, I don't remember there being a huge backlash, but I remember being, as a comic fan, I was like super excited to try something new because I didn't really know much about Batman at the time. I mean, I knew enough, but I still was like, oh, I've never really read a Batman. Now is my time, I guess. When Bruce Wayne isn't Batman, I should start picking it up. But I think to your point of like, well, why did we let things slip back into Bruce Wayne being Batman? I mean, I think it's a combination of, I think, risk management, right? Like not having the mainstay character be that character is a risk for publishers like Marvel and DC, right? I mean, Jason Aaron, I think there was a lot of pushback when Jane Foster took over the mantle of Thor. I mean, spoilers for an old Thor that came out like 5 years ago or something. Maybe it was less than that, but still, like, I know there was a lot of pushback, and they're like, I can't believe Woman's gonna be Thor. That's the voice of all the people out there screaming on the internet, and I don't know. I didn't see it as an issue. I'm not scared of it, but I think that the big thing is Marvel and DC have to fall back onto these characters because they're guaranteed money makers versus this new thing with a character can always be a bit of a risk that they're not sure if it's going to sell well.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good excuse, but I mean, that's from, I think, the corporate side of things. That's where it comes from.
I definitely agree with that, and I think that there's an element of, you know, what's going to be bigger than the death of Superman, the return of Superman. Like, basically, you get to have a big event that sells a bunch of issues where you kill off a character, and then a year, 2 years later, you sell a bunch more issues, bringing them back.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is something to be said, the boldness of keeping a character dead in superhero comics. It's at this point a fucking meta joke where you even hear it in the comics. I think I've read at least a half dozen comics over the last 2 years where somebody's talking about a dead X-Men character and they're like, but you X-Men don't really tend to stay dead, do you? It's like, all right, man, like, you're taking the fucking fun out of it. Yeah. You're taking like the meaningfulness of the death of a character out of this entire run. Like, I was super overwhelmed when someone like Nightcrawler died, and I really enjoyed that. Like, not to see the character die, but like, holy shit, you take one of the mainstay X-Men and you put him in the ground. That's some serious business. And the fact that like the way that affected characters, I think, was really great, and it drove a lot of the like growth and development of a lot of characters. But I mean, it's not just character death, but I think like that this is one of the examples of like, I think it led to good stories, and I think that having them stay dead for a long period of time could have continued to grow those stories and grow those characters. And yet the worry is, well, we want this character back now. We have a story for them, so let's just bring them back in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, like I like that you said or some shape, because like there's all the time travel stuff with X-Men and dimension hopping, like, and you said, there was like they mention it in the comics, like there's the young Cyclops being in the current timeline, and then he explains to someone else, he's like, yeah, the other me, he is dead and I'm from the past, and then like I don't even remember who it is, but it's like a time traveler. So I was like, I hate everything you it's Nova. He was like, I hate everything you just said.
Yeah
And it's like, you know, that's exactly how we feel. And it's, I
mean, I don't know if that's exactly true. I think we're speaking for ourselves here.
That's true.
So there's only so much we can infer, but like,
no, I don't know how.
Yeah, but I think it's more of a question of like, why is change considered bad? Why can't we do something that actually has long-term effects? Like, I think this is us talking about event fatigue. This is us talking about, you know, like characters taking on new mantles. Like, so many people were upset by, you know, Doc Ock at one point, you know, being Peter Parker. I mean, they knew that that's not how it was going to be permanently, but like Peter Parker was straight up dead for a while, you know. Like, I think, you know, Miles Morales, I think, is probably one of the rare exceptions of like critical success with a character where when Peter Parker died in the Ultimate Universe, we got this brand new Spider character who is like people really resonated with. He's a very fantastic character. But I think he's one of the very few examples of where there was success, where someone took over a mantle because things were so drastically different. He's almost his own character. And then when you do the merging of the 616 and the Ultimate Universe, then you get to have those two Spider people, Peter Parker and Miles Morales, living side by side. It's kind of a cop-out in some ways, but you still at least created something new that was able to sell pretty well. Like, I think the Miles Morales book still does pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah, but it's also outrageous, though, because Peter Parker came back to life in the Ultimate Universe. So it was, that's a whole thing. They already brought him back, and then they were like, well, now we're going to merge it, so
goodbye.
Stuff.
Yeah, I think that part of it is that people might not necessarily stop and analyze their reactions before they get on Twitter to post about it. So I think that a lot of the outrage that we see when a new character is taking over a mantle, so when we have Bucky Barnes coming on as Cap or Sam Wilson coming on as Cap or whatever, a lot of the times when people are getting up in arms about how Sam Wilson could never be Captain America, I think that what they're trying to say is, but I love Steve Rogers as Captain America and I don't want him to go away. And sure, I think that's a fine feeling. You're allowed to be sad or disappointed that the character you love isn't going to be the same anymore. It's totally fine and understandable to have those feelings. What's not fine and understandable is then to get online and start being an asshole about something that you haven't even read yet. It's because it could be that the new character might suck. It might actually be bad that this character is taking over this role. Mm-hmm. But until you've read it, you don't know for sure.
Right.
And it really bothers me when people don't give stuff a chance like that.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you're trying to get someone into, say, Captain America in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. And they didn't like Steve Rogers as a character at all. Say they pick up your favorite run of Captain America, and they're like, I don't really like this guy. Like, how would you feel? Like, they didn't give it a chance. They didn't even try. So what? There's 50 years of history. Who gives a shit? If I've never read Captain America before, and then I try your book, and I go, I don't really like him. Like, he's too much of a Boy Scout. I don't like his blonde hair and blue fucking eyes. Like, no, that's a bad reason. But still, like, I don't like the way that character, interacts with the world. I don't like the way that his worldview. What would you do? Like, how would you feel about that? You say, oh no, give it a chance. Make it, you just got to get through this volume and it'll be better. It's the excuse that all comic book readers do when they're trying to get people into a specific series or a specific book. But it's like you as the long-term comic book reader also need to be in that mentality of like, just give it a trade. Just give it a little bit of time. And instead, don't just go and drag a book on Twitter just because you're upset with an idea or a cover of something like that. I mean, there are reasons to be upset by covers. I don't want to wash that over, but even still, just to be upset with the idea simply because it's out there is not fair to the book itself. Like, Marvel and DC aren't publishing books for the most part with no fucking idea as to what's going on. Like, they are the people that control the narrative. So they're going to be putting out books that they think fit the best for their characters. And I think Sam Wilson taking over Captain America, if you know anything about Sam Wilson, that makes sense. It completely makes sense. I'm not trying to we don't have to get too deep on this Captain America thing, but I just there is that idea that you said, Brian, give something a chance because you would want other people to also give it a chance. I think that's totally valid.
And I do want to clarify that there are, of course, always going to be exceptions. There are going to be situations where it's fine to look at something and go, oh no, that's bad. With Hydra Cap, I feel like that was certainly a time when the reaction was probably appropriate, but there's a strong difference between Captain America's a Nazi now and Thor is a woman now. I don't feel like I have to go into explaining what that difference is, but
I mean, if our listeners don't get it,
should probably mention though that whole thing was just an arc, and that was due to a cosmic cube thing. Granted, it took to the very
Captain America thing.
Yeah, him being a Hail Hydra someone was like, well, I don't like Captain America. I'm going to make a wish on a cosmic cube and turn him what if he was a Hydra person?
I love that you called it making a wish, like, because that's perfect. That's exactly what it is.
That's what it was, because at the same time, what ended up happening in that arc was because the person who made this thing a reality, because they remembered how Cap was, that created like a shadow image of Cap as he was, who then somehow blinked into existence and then fought Hydra Cap and then won, and then Cap came back to being, you know, Captain America.
Yeah,
it's all very, you know.
We don't have to get into that story because I know that there was a lot of like pushback and there was a lot of things like on the whole. I remember the biggest controversy was like, if we're going to say that Hydra is essentially Nazis, why would you make Captain America, who was created like by two Jewish Americans, like a Nazi? Like that was the big thing I saw.
Hitler.
And it was like,
yeah, exactly.
But it was like like there were all these writers from Marvel that were like, give it a chance, just hold up, like it's going to be an interesting story. And I think it's because, you know, maybe they knew where it was going, maybe they were in the pitch or something, or they had faith in the art or in the writer. And obviously, it did end up being like, hey, gotcha, that's not the way it is supposed to be. You're right, it is messed up.
Yeah.
But like
but that's like,
but at the same time, so it was
that's
like,
not seeing the world.
Yeah,
like that's not seeing the perspective that people are going to take from it, given like political climates. Like comic books are inherently political. We did a whole episode about this. So like when you throw something like that out, especially in these times, it seems like it's a little bit too edgy for us guys. Sorry, Marvel, could you tone it back a bit? Because I'm going to these comics to escape. I don't need to go into this comic to feel the weird, strange yelling and screaming of bigotry that I'm seeing on the internet already. Like, I don't know.
Don't get me wrong.
Diving too deep.
I was furious when that came out. I was so mad. And then when I found out that it was all for a storyline, I was like, I mean, that makes it a little better, but at the same time, still not cool. Like,
yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to invalidate what you're saying. I'm just like, we're diving too deep on this Captain America rabbit hole thing. That's all. We need to move on.
So it sounds like he's a big character or something.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it is, and I think the question is still like, you know, why are people upset with the idea of a character changing, right? Like, what if all of a sudden tomorrow Tony Stark was a bad guy, like something that happened kind of in Civil War, right? Like Tony Stark became a bad guy because he started to head up S.H.I.E.L.D., and he was the person persecuting people across the United States for registration, like during the Superhero Registration Act. Like, how did we feel about that, and were people upset? And I don't know. Like, I read it as like a, you know, I'm more of a person that's like okay with these changes because on the whole, like, there is a lot of potential for like interesting stories without it being offensive. Like Tony Stark being a bad guy and like trying to push this whole thing was an interesting storyline where you're like, I don't want to be the bad guy, but I'm part of this government thing is interesting to me. I'm willing to explore that, provided like the good guys are going to win in the end, and we kind of know for the most part in comics, good guys usually win. So it's not scary to imagine something like that. Yeah, I don't know.
That kind of makes me think, because I remember when I read Civil War, that whole thing kind of tracked with me. I was like, you know, I believe Tony Stark would do that, but like all of my knowledge from Tony Stark at that point was stuff that I'd read in the comics, which 616 Tony Stark is a little bit different from Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Tony Stark. So I was like, no, that tracks. He would definitely do that. And but they also portrayed it in the comic as a very makes sense. He was like, this horrible thing happened. I'm now in it because of these reasons and these reasons. I had this reaction to it. I'm now committed to this plan for these reasons. And I think it made this very logical sense in the story.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, that like having a reason for change can go a long way towards making people accept the change.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Peter Parker in 616, when he died and we did the Doc Ock Spider-Man, you know, I don't know if there was a reason behind it happening, but the reason that Doc Ock continues to be Spider-Man and the reason leading up to that is amazing. And it really does, like, Dan Slott took his time in that last issue of Amazing Spider-Man before going into Superior Spider-Man to make you understand, you know, how this was going to work. And sort of it just kind of reinvigorated all the reasons why you love Spider-Man. And it's because of all the things that he's been through. And then pushing that, not pushing that, but having someone else experience it, you know, to understand why, kind of like, one, made you fall in love with Peter Parker all over again, but also like wonder how someone else who has experienced that but also has a different way of thinking is going to continue. So I mean, I think like, again, sort of seeing that logical thought process definitely helps when entering a new character taking over Mantle, instead of just being like, well, bam, here we are.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Here's kind of a more meta question here about this. Like, do you think that the perspective of change has, for lack of a better word, changed over time? Like, in that, when you're thinking about something like Batman Beyond, totally brand new, out there idea of Batman in the future, right? Bruce Wayne still exists, but he's not the focal character. And so when you were younger and you were watching that, or, you know, eventually you're reading the comics that kind of came out, were you more accepting because you were like younger and you were more like, hey, this is cool, this is a new take on Batman, or you're just like, I want more Batman, so give me whatever I can get, versus nowadays you kind of have more of a choice because you know where you can spend your dollar, or you're more aware of all of the potential options of things you could get, and you're thinking like, I just want the same stuff over and over and over because it's comfortable, versus just accepting anything that the publisher or maybe TV production company throws at you.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's changed because of like social media or like more advanced knowledge and things like that?
Maybe it's just because I'm kind of an outsider to the comics world. It's not something that I've always been, you know, more than knee deep in. But I love it when they do a change to a character like that, because it makes me think that this is a way that I can appreciate this character in the same way that everybody else is. You know, like because I haven't read, you know, a ton of back matter on the old character. Like I had never read any Thor comics before the Jane Foster Thor came out, but I jumped on that and, you know, read that whole run just because I knew that this was a chance for me to experience this character the same way everyone else is.
Right, like getting in at the ground floor with everybody else.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a bunch of stuff, obviously, like, I didn't understand any of what was going on with Asgard being destroyed and Asgardia and Asgardians on the moon. Like, there's a bunch of stuff in there that carried over from classic Thor that I didn't understand. But nobody had any history with this character that I didn't have. And that made it feel like a very accessible way for me to enjoy this comic.
I think...
Gotcha.
I like it because I like change because it's a new story. Brian will attest to this. I really like stories over character. Like, so I pretty much really only care if the story is interesting. I think I was thinking about what you said about Batman Beyond, and I was like, really what got me into Batman Beyond wasn't that it's a new Batman. I was like, that world looks dope. Or Shui,
gotcha,
as I should say now.
Shui?
Yeah, that's what they say in the show. They're like, Shui. It's cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That came up in the Flash TV show, too.
Oh, that's dope. Shui.
You mean that Shui?
Yeah, that's Shui. But, like, it was a cool world, and it was also, it was kind of like neo-cyberpunk, which was really cool at the time, and I was, like, all into that, because every movie was that for the future. But then it was also Batman, and I was like, rad. And, but it was also, like, a really good story. It did different things, and I think when you have a new character, or, you know, someone else taking over, and it goes to, like, interesting, even, like, new... So, like, in Thor, you know, Asgard was destroyed. They had to go do something different, like, because we can't go back. Like, what are they going to do? What's the journey there? And I like those new things they're having, especially with someone trying to figure out who they are in this role, discovering, like, what it takes, and then just also, like, just all the nuts things that happen, you know? Like, the Battle for the Cowl was an all-out war in Gotham streets before there was a new Batman. And then it's all about taming that, and then there's also people figuring out that, you know, is that a new Batman? It's like, oh, Batman's back. Is that a fake? Is it going to be as strong as the last Batman? There's all these different strings being pulled, and it's just so interesting.
I guess to get back to my question a little bit, though, do you think that, like, since you're older now, you're more I guess, you're more aware of like the ramifications of change versus when you were younger, when you were like maybe taking in stories like this and not really knowing their origins, just kind of like rolling with the punches because you didn't know anything else. Like you didn't have the internet, or you didn't have the ability to like deep dive onto who was creating this and why and what their origins were, and reading interviews and all that stuff. Like I feel like there is this switch over as the internet has become more prevalent that has allowed us to investigate the reasons behind changes versus just kind of rolling with them. Do you guys agree with that? I don't know. I've been listening to a podcast recently about how wrestling has become really, really transparent over the years. I know this isn't related to comics, but follow me here. And because of that, it makes wrestling seem like a little bit cheaper. I mean, it's still entertaining and it's still really fun, but you can tell that like the people who are involved in wrestling, specifically the wrestlers themselves, are like trying to carry themselves as people versus their characters, and because of that, it's kind of cheapened wrestling, or it's made it really weird for some people. I don't know. Maybe I'm not being clear what I'm saying, but like, does that make any sense to you guys? What I'm saying here, like because of the prevalence of information on the internet, you know almost too much about these characters in wrestling, and it's the same with creators in comics. Like because of the internet, you know too much about their sources, and therefore it kind of can cheapen things, or it can really make you reevaluate how you feel about a change. I don't know if any of that makes sense.
I guess I can see where you're getting at, and I think that definitely has a part to play. I think that definitely will affect some people, and some people the way they read it. For me personally, I've always just been the kind of just roll with it person, especially where I'm just like, you know what? Because even in wrestling stories, I'll talk to my brother and be like, yeah, when they did this storyline, I was like, that was bullcrap, because obviously this wrestler's better than that wrestler. And my brother's like, it's a story though, right? I was like, yeah, but I'm all caught up in it. I don't care that I know that they're acting, but I am invested in the story that they're telling. So like, for me personally, I don't pay attention to all that outside stuff, because I just want to know, like, what's this dance they're doing? I want to see it.
Right. You're just reading the stories. You're not really like doing a deep dig on like why a story came to be or how it came to be.
But I can see how that surge of information could definitely affect how people, view the changes of characters or the changes in story and all that. And I guess I'd never even considered it, which shows, how I am, I guess.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Brian, how about you? Do you feel like that has any influence on like how you view changes in comics?
I don't know how much of this is just my ADHD coming through, but I've always been a big fan of change. And like I said, I don't know how much of that is a new shiny thing, and how much is just me being a flexible person who's open to new things. Gotcha. But it's not something that I really think about a whole lot. Of course, I also don't follow a lot of comic creators on Twitter or anything like that. So a lot of the times, I find out about these changes when somebody in the group shares an article or something like that. So it's not...
Gotcha.
It's not something that I really have an inside view on.
Gotcha. I mean, I think there's another piece to this, and it's maybe not doing like research or reading articles or whatever, because I think that's part of it. But another thing is, I think that there's been like this cultural shift in comics. In mass media in general, like characters that have like a long history with people that are like part of their nostalgia or whatever, of being a kid, or just having been a reader of comics for a long time. I think some people get very upset with change because the character that they know and love is changing, and that changes their perspective on those characters, and therefore, and they don't like it. Like they don't like that, in a hypothetical world, Captain America now has a goatee and he's sticking with it, and that's part of his character now. And somebody's just could be very, very upset about that because they're like, no, Captain America never has facial hair. That's one of the staples of his character. And I mean, sure it is. Maybe it has been for 50 years. But I don't see the issue with the change. I mean, again, this is my take on it, but I think that people do have these ideas of these characters and who they are and what they're meant to be and how they represent something in their heads, and they have a very personal ownership to those characters. And of course, that varies from person to person.
Yeah, for sure.
But when that change happens, it really changes their perspective, and it can be upsetting. I mean, the whole world is upsetting constantly all the time. Everyone's upset about everything and the world sucks and yada, yada, yada. But to have like these characters to hold on to and say, at least here's a staple of consistency to some extent, can be reassuring. And when that consistency changes, it's obviously no longer consistent and therefore upsetting. I think there's a lot of personal ownership that people are putting on characters like Luke Skywalker changing, or anyone that's been around for years and years and years. We have these ideas of who they are, and when we see them change, it can be upsetting. Now, I think that the three of us sound pretty fantastic when we say we're really open to change, but I don't think that that's maybe 100% true. But I'm not to try to call you guys out, but I'm just saying, like, in general, I think people on the whole, when they think about comic book characters or one comic book character, like if Gambit suddenly was like, I'm no longer a thief, I'm an accountant, I'd maybe be a little upset about it. I'm not going to scream and yell on the internet, but like, I think that would be disappointing. But I think other people have a much stronger reaction to changes like that. And that might be where we see this visceral, upset feeling on the internet or when we talk to other people about characters. I mean, because I've gotten into those arguments with people about comic book characters, and I've just been like, I'm not going to have this conversation with you, dude, because it doesn't bother me that much. I know it bothers you, and I'm not trying to act like I'm above you, but my thought is to roll with it. Whereas I do see people that get very upset about, you know, Batman no longer having a black cowl or something like that. Again, I'm pointing out superficial things because I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but I think there's a lot of personal ownership that people put on comic book characters, and when they see that change, it really upsets them. I'm talking in circles now, so I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but that's like my big observation from all of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally natural to feel that way. It's just one of those things where that doesn't mean you're allowed to be a butthole.
Yeah. Like I think there's a difference between being angry and shouting your opinions versus having a conversation that doesn't get heated, just being like, you know, this is the reason why I didn't like this, and that's fine for me. Like you know, because there are so many of my friends that like the direction of the new Star Wars films, and I just don't care anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm not like angry about them. I'm just like, God, I don't. It doesn't interest me, but I you know, and there's things to be said about that and all that. So I forgot my point that I was talking about.
That's all right.
I actually started thinking about The Last Jedi and got like distracted, and then I was like,
that's okay.
It's just the difference between saying I'm upset versus you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Let's use
that's
our,
it.
use
That's
our
the podcast.
Like,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of just outward frustration that people have, and they want to point blame versus trying to accept change or like understand said change. And we kind of talked about it already earlier in the show, but yeah, Brian, I think that's a really good way to put that.
Brian had a good point earlier where it was he was talking about you know, like just hate and all that. And he was talking about how it's just one thing to just say, I'm upset about this, I hate this, I hate you for liking this, and, you know, actually just being like, you know, I just don't care for that. And it's in the way that we discuss these things. So it's not that these things are inherently bad or that we hate them. It's just more of like coming to terms with the way that you should talk about things changing in a group setting or even just one-on-one with people.
Yeah, and as always in comics, you have the option of just not reading it if you don't like it.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really loaded response. I only say that because I've heard that
I mean, it's
before, and
it's definitely very dismissive in a way.
Yeah,
but it's one of those things where you have to choose how you're going to spend your energy. And if reading this is going to make you angry and make you waste your energy online shouting about it, then maybe the best thing for you to do is take a step back.
Yeah, take a step. But that reminds me.
I mean,
my brother was listening to this podcast about Warhammer 40K, which is a game thing that he does. But in that podcast, they were talking about how you know, getting into new things and changing things, and they were like, you know, he's like, it's not that I'm upset about it, it's just that I have no interest. And I think that's like it's okay to watch it and like, but aggressively go into something thinking you're going to hate it and just to talk about hating it. If you have no interest in it, I think Brian's right. I think you should take a step back. Don't actively pursue something if you just want to take a dump on it.
Yeah. I mean, the only counterpoint I want to bring up to this is if you don't like it, don't read it is problematic when it comes to things like where we see books that feature like unintentional racism or unintentional sexism, or you've got things with scantily clad men or women that make people upset, and you see them screaming about it on the internet, and it's kind of like, well, if you don't like it, don't read it, is like a weird argument for that, because then at that point it's like you need to talk to somebody, but you don't need to talk to the public. You need to talk to the publishers, and I guess like by not buying it, you're technically kind of spending your money as your proof of saying I'm not participating in this. But there is some validity in saying like being upset, but like there's a difference between going like, I think it would be a reasonable thing to be upset to say like, okay, now Captain Marvel is going to go back to wearing a bikini in her comics, and it's going to be Kamala Khan. Like that's where we're like, hold the fucking phone, hold on, I actually don't like this change, and I think that's wrong. But there's like this. We're kind of running out of tape here, so I don't want to dive too deep into this. And Brian, I'll let you get to your point. But like, there's this thing where like we as a public kind of also need to be aware of things that are socially unacceptable. And that varies from society to society and person to person. But there are some kind of blanket rules that we've got as an American society, and we can deal with the American publishers to say like something like that's probably not okay because that's offensive because of this, and this. And I know we could potentially go down this rabbit hole of what does offensive mean, but still there are some changes that you can scream about. But on the whole, like there is something in terms of story, right? Which is kind of where I think this spawned from, where change is something you need to try to accept versus other things that can be offensive. So Brian, sorry to get to your point.
It's just a kind of my closing thought is, if a change is happening and you're upset about it, be honest with yourself about why you're upset. Because you may well have a very good reason to be upset. Like, there are plenty of things to be upset about. But I guess before you take to the message boards or whatever kids are using these days to go off about it, sit down and ask yourself, why am I mad about this? What about this is setting me off?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Renee, final thoughts?
I think Brian just said it best. But also, like, read the Dick Grayson Batman, because it was dope, and Bucky Cap and Sam Wilson Cap, because they were great. Also, Bart Allen Flash, the Fastest Man Alive miniseries. All dopeness.
Cool. Well, Renee, I'm glad you brought this topic to the table for the show, because this is a pretty great discussion. I'm glad that we had it. But yeah, I guess, like I said, run out of tape here, so let's wrap this thing up. You can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow me at Mike Rappin. You can follow Renee at Rodriguer29. You can follow Brian at BrianHead. And you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where I try to post pretty regularly with updates and things that folks need to know, plus little Patreon posts and things that are public when we have them. It's pretty fun. And we're on Instagram, so if you're not following us there, make sure you jump on Instagram and follow us at IRCB Podcast as well.
Subscribe on Patreon. That's patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Without your support, this show wouldn't survive, literally. Join now for access to new and Patreon-only episodes and articles. You get early access to the top of my pile posts, and so much more. There's also a Goodreads group, and we have a lovely community of comic friends, and we have lots of weekly threads. Not Freds. I'm sure there's Freds on there, too. I mean, why not?
I think there's a Fred. One Fred.
Fred, yay! Good for you, Fred.
You can also find us on our website, ircbpodcast.com, where we have our pronunciation guide and a merch store. And while you're on the internet, why don't you go ahead and rate our show, subscribe, tell your friends about us. If you haven't rated us, why not? We have 207 episodes. We should have at least 207 reviews, right? If you have any questions, comments, concerns, jokes, please feel free to email the show at ircb@destroythesybe.org.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of the music for our show. We really want to thank them for letting us use their music. They have a new album coming out very soon. You can check that out at infinityshred.com or on Spotify or Google Play, wherever you get your music. Xander is a wizard. He also edits the show. He's just a fun guy and a fantastic dungeon master. I want to thank him for being just a fantastic human being. Thanks to Brian and Renee for being on the show. Thank you to you, the listener. You are an amazing person. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.